Will you be my friends? 7 words. Spoken by a 7-year-old girl with a broken arm and hand-drawn stars on her cast, standing alone at a red light, looking straight up at a man the rest of the world crossed the street to avoid. He had tattoos up to his jaw, a leather vest that said things people whispered about, and he hadn't said a kind word to a stranger in years. He froze. She didn't. If this story moves you, subscribe. Hit the bell and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this little girl's story has traveled. There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't make noise. It doesn't scream. It doesn't cry in hallways or pound on doors. It sits quietly at the end of a lunch table, picks at the edges of a sandwich, and watches the rest of the world like it's a movie playing on the other side of thick glass, something you can see perfectly but cannot touch, cannot enter, no matter how long you stand there pressing your hands against it. Emma Carter knew that kind of loneliness. She had known it for most of her 7 years on this earth. And on the morning that everything in her life began to change, she didn't know it was changing. She was just doing what she always did. Getting up, getting dressed, putting on the sneakers with the Velcro straps because the laces were still hard with only one good hand, looking at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment before her mom called her name from the kitchen. Emma, breakfast. Coming. She picked up her backpack with her right arm, the good one, and headed down the stairs. Her cast had been on for 3 weeks by then. She had broken her left arm on a Saturday afternoon in late September, tripping over the edge of the back porch in a way that was almost embarrassing in how ordinary it was. No dramatic story, no heroic fall from a tree or a bicycle crash on a steep hill. Just a misstep, a yelp, and then a drive to the emergency room with her mother gripping the steering wheel with both hands and trying very hard not to cry in front of her. The cast was white when they put it on. By the end of the first day, Emma had drawn 7 stars on it with a black marker. By the end of the first week, there were over 40. Her mother, Sarah, had stood in the doorway of Emma's bedroom that first night watching her daughter bent over the cast with total concentration, the tip of her tongue peeking out from the corner of her mouth, the way it always did when she was focused on something. Sarah hadn't said anything. She had just watched and felt something press against the inside of her chest, that she couldn't name exactly, something between pride and heartbreak balanced on a wire so thin it hurt. Emma looked up. "Do you think stars can hear you when you talk to them?" Sarah blinked. "What do you mean, baby? Like if you're having a bad day and you look up and you talk to a star, do you think it listens, or is it just light?" Sarah had walked across the room, sat on the edge of the bed, and pulled her daughter close with one arm. "I think," she said carefully, "that anything that lasts that long deserves to be listened to." Emma had thought about that for a moment, then nodded satisfied and gone back to drawing. The truth about Emma Carter was that she wasn't difficult to understand. She was just difficult for certain people to slow down enough to reach. She was quiet in a world that rewarded loudness. She was thoughtful in a classroom that moved fast. She noticed things the way a cloud changed shape between one minute and the next, the particular sound a cafeteria made right before the lunch bell rang, the fact that Mrs. Patterson always touched the same corner of her desk when she was nervous, and she filed these observations away inside herself like small, precious objects, taking them out only when she was alone, turning them over in her hands, examining them in the light. Her teachers called her a little different. They meant it kindly. Most of them did anyway. But second grade is not a place where a little different is a gift anyone knows how to unwrap. His name was Tyler Booth, 8 years old, 1 grade above her, with a loud laugh and a habit of standing in the center of every social situation like it was his natural habitat, which in the small universe of Lincoln Elementary School in Millbrook, Colorado, it absolutely was. Tyler had noticed Emma the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit a pattern. Not with cruelty at first, just with the careless clarity of a child who hasn't yet learned to keep his observations to himself. It started on a Tuesday. Emma had been sitting alone at her usual spot at the end of the lunch table, the one closest to the window, eating her sandwich and watching a pigeon on the other side of the glass do something inexplicable with a piece of foil. She was completely absorbed. She was almost happy. Tyler had walked past with his tray, glanced at her, and said to no one in particular, but loud enough for the entire table to hear, "Why does she always sit alone? Doesn't she have any friends?" Laughter, not mean, not yet, just thoughtless. the kind of laughter that fills a space because silence feels uncomfortable. Emma hadn't looked up from the pigeon, but her jaw had tightened. Just slightly, just enough for someone paying close attention to notice. No one was paying close attention. It got worse the following week. Emma had been standing near the swings during recess, not swinging, just standing nearby, working up to it the way she sometimes did, running the decision through her head a few times before committing when Tyler had come over with two of his friends. "Hey," he said, not unkindly, more like he was conducting a small investigation. "Why don't you ever play with anybody?" Emma looked at him. "I do sometimes." "Like who?" She thought about it. "I played with Mia last month. We made a chart of cloud shapes." Tyler's friends exchanged a glance. One of them, a boy named Darian, pressed his lips together to hold back a smile. "A chart of cloud shapes," Tyler repeated. "It was a really good chart," Emma said without any defensiveness. "Simply stating a fact." Tyler looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "And this was the one that stayed, the one that would follow her home and sit at the foot of her bed that night like a stone. She couldn't move. I don't think anybody really wants to be your friend. No offense." And he walked away. And Emma stood there by the swings. And she did not cry. Not because she wasn't hurt. She was hurt in a way that went down deeper than tears, down into some quiet place where she kept all the things she didn't have words for yet. But she did not cry. She just stood very still and looked at the sky and found a cloud that looked like a hand reaching for something just out of frame. She thought he's probably wrong, but she wasn't completely sure. That evening in the car, on the way back from her occupational therapy appointment, Emma was looking out the window in the particular way she had when she was thinking hard about something, her chin resting on her good hand, her breath fogging small circles on the glass when she spoke. "Mom." "Yeah, baby." "Do you think I'm weird?" Sarah's hands tightened on the wheel. She recognized this kind of question. These were the ones you had to answer carefully because a 7-year-old could hear the difference between a real answer and a kind one, and Emma could hear it better than most. "I think you're one of the most interesting people I've ever met," Sarah said. "That's not what I asked." Sarah exhaled slowly. "Who said something to you?" "Mo," a beat of silence. "A boy at school. He said nobody wants to be my friend." Emma paused. Then with the calm matter-of-factness that always made Sarah's heart clench, "I think I want to prove him wrong." "You absolutely should," Sarah said. "And you know what you will." Emma turned back to the window. "I just need to find the right people to ask." They drove in silence for a moment, and then Sarah slowed the car. Because they're parked outside the Highway 9 diner lined up in a row that seemed to stretch the entire length of the building were the motorcycles. Dozens of them, gleaming and powerful, their chrome catching the late afternoon sun like something out of a movie. And around them, leaning against the seats in the side of the building, were their riders. Big men, hard-looking men, men with leather vests and tattoos and expressions that had been weathered by decades of something Sarah didn't want to think too hard about. The logo on their vests was immediately recognizable even from the road. Hell's Angels. Sarah's instinct was to drive faster. She almost did, but Emma had pressed her face against the glass. "Mom," she breathed, "look at all of them." "I see them, sweetheart." Eyes forward. "They look like knights," Emma said. Sarah blinked. "What? The vests? They look like armor, like old knights." Sarah didn't answer. She just drove and tried to keep her eyes on the road and tried not to think about what her daughter had just said with such perfect, uncomplicated wonder. 2 days passed. On the third day, Sarah was driving Emma home from school, a Friday overcast, the kind of Colorado afternoon that can't decide if it wants to turn into something when they hit a red light on Main Street. And there on a motorcycle in the lane beside them was one of the men from the diner. He was alone this time. Big, broad-shouldered, a salt and pepper beard, a leather vest with patches she couldn't read from this angle. He was looking straight ahead, one hand on the throttle, the other resting on his knee. His face was the kind of face that had stopped asking to be understood a long time ago. Sarah noticed him, registered him, looked back at the light. Emma noticed him differently. She unbuckled her seatbelt. "Emma." But Emma had already opened the door. "Emma, what are you, Emma?" It happened in the span of about 15 seconds, which is approximately 14 more seconds than Sarah's heart could handle. Emma walked around the front of the car in the middle of a red light on Main Street in front of God and traffic and this enormous man on a motorcycle, and she stopped right beside him. The man looked down. Emma looked up, and she said it, clear and direct and without a single tremor. "Excuse me, will you be my friends?" The man on the motorcycle said nothing. He just stared at her. "My name is Emma," she continued, gesturing at the cast. "I broke my arm. I have 47 stars on it. I'm in second grade. A boy at school told me nobody wants to be my friend, and I want to prove he's wrong. So will you be my friends?" Silence. The light turned green. Neither of them moved. A car behind them honked once, then thought better of it. The man, Jack Iron Callahan, though Emma didn't know his name yet, looked down at this child who had walked out into a street to talk to him. This small, serious, completely fearless child, with the cast full of stars and the level gaze that didn't flinch. He had not been looked at like that simply directly, without either fear or agenda, in longer than he could remember. His voice, when it finally came, was low and a little rough, like it hadn't been used for gentle things in a while. "Kid," he said, "you probably shouldn't talk to strangers." "You're not a stranger anymore," Emma said. "I just introduced myself." The logic was completely airtight. Jack stared at her. Then something happened in his face. Something small, almost invisible, like a door somewhere deep inside him, had shifted half an inch on its hinges. He didn't smile. Not exactly, but the hardness around his eyes loosened just slightly, just enough. "You got guts," he said. "I'll give you that." "My mom is worried," Emma said, glancing back at the car where Sarah sat frozen with both hands on the wheel and the expression of a woman actively reconsidering every decision she had ever made. "But I just wanted to ask, that's all. You don't have to say yes." She turned to go. "Hey," Jack said. Emma turned back. He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something that didn't have a name. "What school?" he said finally. Emma blinked. What school do you go to, Lincoln Elementary, on Birchwood." He nodded once, slowly. "Okay," he said. Emma studied him. "Okay, yes, or okay, I hear you." A sound came out of Jack Callahan that he had not made in years. It was small and involuntary, almost swallowed before it could fully exist. But it was a laugh. "Go get in the car, kid," he said. Emma nodded, satisfied, the way she always looked when she had completed a task she'd set herself, and walked back to the car, buckled her seatbelt, and settled against the seat. Sarah was staring at her. "Emma Grace Carter," she whispered. "What on earth?" "I asked them to be my friends," Emma said simply. She looked out the window as the motorcycle pulled away. "I think he said yes, kind of." That night in the house he'd lived alone in for the past 6 years, Jack Callahan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He wasn't drinking and did not move for a very long time. He was a chapter leader. He had held that position for 9 years, which meant he had seen things and done things and been responsible for men and decisions and outcomes that he carried around with him like weight distributed carefully across both shoulders, so nothing tipped too far in either direction. He was 53 years old. He had 2 ex-wives, a son who didn't return his calls, and a reputation that cleared rooms before he entered them. He had been called many things in his life. He had never been called anyone's friend by a 7-year-old girl with 47 hand-drawn stars on her arm. He picked up his phone, opened the group chat, typed for a moment, stopped, deleted it, set the phone down, picked it up again. What he finally typed was this: "Got something I want to run by the group. Not club business, personal. Come by the garage tomorrow morning if you can." He set the phone down, looked at the wall, said out loud to no one, "A kid." He shook his head, but he did not go to sleep for a long time. The next morning, 11 men showed up at his garage. They were not soft men. They were not sentimental men. They were men who had built their lives around a particular code loyalty, brotherhood strength, and who had long since made their peace with the fact that the rest of the world was never going to fully understand them, and had decided collectively and separately that this was fine. This was just how it was. Jack told them the story simply, without embellishment. He told them about the red light. He told them about the small girl with the pentext. He told them what she said word for word, because he had not forgotten a single one, and he told them what she looked like when she said it. Calm, certain, not afraid. By the time he finished, the garage was very quiet. One of the men, Richie, who had been riding with the chapter for over 20 years and had the emotional range of a geological formation, cleared his throat. How old did you say she was? 7. Richie nodded slowly, said nothing. She walked right up to you, said another man, Denny, leaning forward. Right up to me, in the middle of a red light, while her mom was in the car having what I assume was a medical event. A few short sounds around the room, not quite laughter, something more complicated than that. And she said, nobody wants to be her friend. This from Tommy, the youngest in the group at 38, who was also, though he would never admit it, the most tender-hearted man in the chapter by a significant margin. That's what she said. Tommy pressed his mouth into a line, looked at the floor. That's not right, he said quietly. No, Jack agreed. It isn't. Another silence. Then Richie, in the measured tone of a man who has never once in his life been described as impulsive, said, What are you thinking? Jack looked at him. I think we should go say hello. To a second-grade class. To a kid who had the nerve to ask. The room sat with that. And then one by one, slowly, without fanfare, without anyone making a speech about it, the men in that garage started nodding. I'll make some calls, said Denny. Me too, said Tommy. I know some guys from the Springs chapter, said another voice from the back. Jack looked around the room. This doesn't go out as club business, he said carefully. This is personal. You want to come, you come because you want to. No pressure, no expectation. How many you think? Richie asked. Jack thought for a moment. Let's see how many care. He had genuinely not known what to expect. He found out over the next 18 hours. The messages started slowly and then they didn't. By that afternoon, he had confirmations from 40 men. By evening 8, by midnight, with most of the country asleep and the late October air pressing cold against the windows of his garage, where he sat with his phone in a disbelief he couldn't quite shake, the number crossed 100. He sat with that for a long time. 140, 160. By 6 a.m. the next morning, the number was 190. He called Richie. You see the count, he said. I see it. 190. I know, Jack. A pause. For a 7-year-old girl, Jack said. Richie was quiet for a moment. Then, you asked if anybody cared. He let that land. Turns out a lot of people do. Jack set the phone down. 190 men, coming from 4 states, for a little girl named Emma who drew stars on her cast because she wanted something beautiful within reach on the hard days. He thought about what she'd said at the red light after he told her to get back in the car. The way she'd turned back, the way she'd looked up at him with those eyes that didn't carry a single ounce of what he'd been carrying for 30 years. You don't have to say yes. He exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said to the empty garage, to nobody, to a kid 7 miles across town who was probably drawing more stars right now without any idea what was coming. Yeah, I do. Emma Carter woke up that Friday morning not knowing anything had changed. She got dressed the same way she always did, right arm first, then careful with the left, threading the sleeve around the cast slowly so she didn't knock the stars. She brushed her teeth. She looked at herself in the mirror. She had slept well, which surprised her because Thursday nights before school were usually the hardest. Thursday nights, her brain liked to replay the week, sort through everything that had gone wrong, or sideways, or been left unfinished, and present it all back to her like a slideshow she hadn't asked to watch. But last night had been quiet. She had thought about the man on the motorcycle, the way his voice sounded low and rough, like gravel warming in the sun, the way something had shifted in his face when she wouldn't back down. She didn't know his name. She didn't know if he'd do anything at all. She had asked, and he had said okay, and that was the only information she had, and somehow, against all reasonable expectation, it had been enough to let her sleep. She came downstairs. Her mother was at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, which was what Sarah Carter looked like when she was running on less sleep than she needed, and more worry than she wanted to admit to. Morning, Emma said. Morning, baby. Sarah watched her pour cereal with the careful precision she'd developed over the past 3 weeks. How are you feeling? Normal. About school? Emma thought about it honestly, the way she always did. A little nervous, but normal nervous. Not bad nervous. Sarah nodded. set her mug down. Emma, about yesterday. I know you were scared, Emma said. I'm sorry I got out of the car. You can't just, Sarah stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. Baby, those men are not people you walk up to at a red light. He was nice, Emma said. You don't know that? He laughed, Emma said simply. Mean people don't laugh like that. Sarah looked at her daughter for a long moment, this small, certain, utterly unmanageable person she had somehow been trusted to raise, and felt the particular exhaustion of a parent who knows they've already lost the argument before it started. Just promise me you won't do anything like that again without telling me first. I promise I'll tell you, Emma said, which was not quite the same promise, and they both knew it, but Sarah decided to take it and move on. They drove to school, mostly in silence, the kind that was comfortable between them. Emma watched the town past the window. Millbrook was the kind of place that looked exactly like what it was, a medium-sized Colorado town that had been mostly the same for 40 years, where everybody knew about 3/4 of everybody else's business, and the remaining quarter was what people talked about at the diner on Saturday mornings. It wasn't a bad town, it was just a town. And sometimes a town could feel very small when you were a person who didn't fit its average dimensions. Sarah pulled up to the curb in front of Lincoln Elementary and put the car in park. Emma unbuckled, grabbed her backpack. Have a good day, Sarah said. I'll try, Emma said, which was also honest. She got out of the car. Sarah watched her walk toward the front entrance. This small figure with the star-covered cast and the backpack slightly too big for her frame, and felt something sharp move through her chest. She waited until Emma pushed through the door before pulling away from the curb. She did not know as she drove away that she would be back within the hour. None of them knew yet what was already in motion. Jack had been up since 4. Not because he needed to be, not because there was anything left to coordinate. The calls had been made, the word had gone out, the responses had come back in numbers. That still in the quiet dark of early morning made something in his chest do something he didn't have a clean name for. He was up because he couldn't sleep. Because every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, not in some dramatic way, not in a way that made sense to explain to another person. He just kept seeing the cast. The stars. The way she'd drawn them so close together, there was barely any white space left between them. He made coffee. He sat. He thought. He had been in this chapter for over 2 decades. In that time, he had seen the group do things the outside world never heard about. Quiet things, unglamorous things. Food drives, toy runs at Christmas. Sitting with veterans who couldn't sleep because some of the men in the chapter had been there themselves and knew that sometimes what a person needs at 2 in the morning isn't advice. Sometimes they just need someone to sit in the same room and not ask them to explain. But this was different. This was a child who had walked up to him at a red light and asked him to prove that the world wasn't as cold as someone had told her it was. And he had said, okay. He looked at his phone. The group chat was still moving even at this hour. Last-minute confirmations. Men asking about the time, the address, the plan. He answered each one with the same brief information. Lincoln Elementary on Birchwood, 7:45, right in together. He typed, no intimidation, no noise. We show up, we line the street, we let her see. That's it. Richie replied within seconds. And if the school tries to stop it, Jack thought about that. We're on a public street. They can't. A pause. Then Richie again, Jack. Just the name. Just 2 letters. Carrying something that didn't need more words than that. Jack typed back, I know. Because he did know. He knew what this looked like from the outside. He knew that 190 Hells Angels bikers showing up outside a 2nd grade school in suburban Colorado was not on the surface an image that broadcast warmth and reassurance. He knew that parents would panic, that administrators would make calls, that the optics, as people like to say, were complicated at best. He knew all of that. He was going anyway, because a 7-year-old girl with stars on her cast had asked him to, and because the only way he knew how to answer a question like hers was to answer it so loudly that no one, not Tyler Booth, not anyone else, would ever be able to tell her again that nobody cared. Sarah Carter's phone rang at 7:38. She was 4 blocks from home, 2nd cup of coffee in hand, mentally sorting through the Friday to-do list that had been accumulating all week when the name on the screen made her frown. Lincoln Elementary. She answered immediately. Hello, Mrs. Carter. The voice on the other end was Janet Morales, the school secretary, and something in her tone was caught between urgent and deeply confused. This is Lincoln Elementary. I'm not sure how to. There's a situation developing outside the school that we think you should be aware of. Sarah's stomach dropped 3 floors. Is Emma okay? Emma is fine. She's inside. She's fine. But Mrs. Carter, there are motorcycles, a lot of motorcycles. They're lining up on Birchwood, both sides of the street. There are a pause and Sarah could hear what sounded like hushed voices in the background. Someone saying a number and then Janet's voice again quieter. There are a lot of them. Sarah had already turned the car around. How many? She said. Another pause. We're still counting. Emma heard the engines before she understood what she was hearing. She was sitting in her second-grade classroom working through a reading worksheet she had already finished in her head twice while waiting for the rest of the class to catch up when the sound started. Low at first, a kind of vibration more than a sound, something you felt in your sternum before your ears processed it. The girl next to her, Madison, lifted her head. The boy by the window, Caleb, turned to look. What is that? Madison said. Nobody answered. The sound kept building. Mrs. Patterson stood up from her desk, walked to the window, looked out, and went very still. Children, she said in a voice that was working hard to stay level. I need everyone to stay in their seats. What is it? Caleb said. Motorcycles, Mrs. Patterson said, and then more quietly, mostly to herself, a lot of them. Emma looked up from her worksheet. Something moved in her chest, not fear, not exactly. Something closer to the feeling she got sometimes when she looked up at the sky at exactly the right moment and caught something. She hadn't expected a rare cloud formation, a double rainbow, a hawk hanging perfectly still in a thermal. The feeling of the world doing something you didn't know it could do. She pressed her lips together, went back to her worksheet, but her pencil had stopped moving. Emma. Mrs. Patterson was looking at her across the room with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. Is there anything you know about what's happening outside? Emma thought about the red light. She thought about the man with the salt and pepper beard and the voice like gravel warming in the sun. She thought about the word he'd said when she'd asked if he meant yes. Okay. I might have asked someone, she said carefully, to be my friend. The classroom was completely silent. Mrs. Patterson blinked. Emma. More than one someone, Emma amended. Said, the sound outside had become something else entirely by then. It wasn't just loud, it was present the way a thunderstorm is present, filling every molecule of available space with the fact of itself. The principal, Dave Harrington, was standing at the front entrance with his phone to his ear, talking to someone at the district office, while one of the 4th grade teachers stood beside him with an expression of pure bewilderment. Through the glass doors, he could see the street. He had tried to count, and somewhere past 120, he had stopped trying. They're just sitting there, the 4th grade teacher just said. I know, Harrington said. They're not doing anything. I know, he said again. And it was true. They had come in from the west end of Birchwood in a line that seemed to have no visible beginning, and they had arranged themselves along both sides of the street with a kind of quiet precision that was somehow more unnerving than chaos would have been. No shouting, no revving engines beyond the initial approach, just presence. Row after row after row of leather and chrome, and men who sat on their bikes and waited as though waiting is something they had a great deal of experience with and no particular anxiety about. Harrington's phone buzzed, a text from the district. Do not engage, we've contacted local PD. Do not let students outside until further notice. He typed back, understood, but I don't think this is a threat. A response came immediately. We don't know what it is, hold position. He lowered his phone, looked back through the glass, and then because he was a person who trusted his instincts, even when they were hard to explain, he pushed the door open and walked outside alone. The nearest biker was a large man with a gray beard who looked up as Harrington approached. His expression was calm, patient. Can I help you gentlemen understand what's happening here? Harrington said. The man, Richie though Harrington didn't know, that looked at him steadily. There's a girl in your school named Emma Carter, he said. Harrington went still. She asked for friends, Richie said. We came. The simplicity of it knocked something loose in Harrington's QTMS. He stood there on the sidewalk in front of his school with 190 Hells Angels bikers lined up along his street and felt something he wasn't prepared to feel at 8 o'clock on a Friday morning. His throat moved. "She's 7 years old," he said, not as an objection, just as a fact he needed to say out loud. "Yeah," Richie said, "we know." The time. Sarah arrived at 7:52. She pulled up to the edge of the police perimeter, 2 squad cars, lights on, but no sirens. The officers standing with their hands on their belts, looking uncertain, in a way that policemen very rarely allowed themselves to look in public. And she got out of her car, and she stood there, and she looked. Her hand came up to her mouth. One of the officers approached her. "Ma'am, we need you to—" "My daughter goes to this school," Sarah said. Her voice was almost steady. "Emma Carter, 2nd grade." The officer stopped. Something changed in his expression. "Your daughter is Emma Carter." "Yes." He looked at her, then back at the street, then at her again. And then he said quietly, not unkindly, "Ma'am, I think you need to come see something." He walked her to a position where she could see the full length of Birchwood Street. And Sarah Carter, who had spent the last 3 weeks watching her daughter eat lunch alone in her head and cry quietly in the bathroom when she thought no one could hear, and draw star after star after star on a white cast, because she needed something beautiful within reach. On the hard days, Sarah Carter stood on the sidewalk outside Lincoln Elementary and looked at 190 Hells Angels bikers lined up for her child. And she made a sound she would never be able to describe to anyone afterward. A sound that wasn't crying, not exactly, but wasn't anything else either. The officer beside her cleared his throat. "Do you know how this happened?" he asked. Sarah thought about a red light, a car door opening before she could stop it, a small girl with a case full of stars walking up to a man on a motorcycle with complete unshakable certainty. "She asked," Sarah said. The officer waited for more. "That's all," Sarah said. "She just asked." "Oh." Jack found her inside. Not the way he planned. He had not planned to go inside, had planned to stay on the street with the others, had planned to simply be part of the visible answer to an invisible question. But Harrington had come back out after that first conversation with Richie, and he had spoken quietly to the officer on the perimeter, and 3 minutes later, the officer had walked to where Jack was sitting on his bike, and said with the careful tone of a man navigating an uncharted water, "The principal would like to know if you the person she asked, if you'd be willing to come inside." Jack had looked at Richie. Richie had looked back at him with the expression of a man who had absolutely no wisdom to offer and knew it. Jack got off his bike. They brought him to the principal's office first, which he had not been in since he was 16 years old, and under very different circumstances. Harrington was there, and a woman Jack didn't recognize who turned out to be the school counselor, and then Sarah Carter, who walked in, stopped when she saw him, and looked at him for a long moment with red eyes and a jaw set tight with the effort of holding something together. "You're the one," she said, not accusing, just placing him. "Yes, ma'am," Jack said. "The red light." "The red light," Sarah looked at him, then she said, "Thank you." 2 words barely above a whisper, but carrying the full weight of every night she had sat outside Emma's bedroom door and listened to the silence inside and didn't know how to fix what she couldn't reach. Jack nodded once. "She's a remarkable kid," he said, and meant it in a way he hadn't meant a compliment in a long time. "I know," Sarah said. I needed someone else to know it too." Harrington cleared his throat softly. "She's asking to come out and see them," he said. Jack and Sarah both looked at him. "Emma," Harrington said. "Mrs. Patterson said she's been asking since she heard the engines. She wants to come out." Sarah pressed her hand over her mouth again. Jack looked at the window, at the street beyond it lined with men who had driven through the night from 4 states because a child they didn't know had asked one of them a question at a red light. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think she probably should." Saying, they walked her out through the front entrance, justing Emma with her mother's hand in her right hand, and Mrs. Patterson a careful 2 steps behind, and Jack just to the side, big and solid and unexpectedly gentle in his nearness. The doors opened, the morning air hit her face, and Emma Carter stepped outside. She stopped. Her lips parted. She looked left. She looked right. She took in the length of Birchwood Street, both sides, the row upon row of men, who had answered the smallest, most honest question she had ever asked. Men who had come from hundreds of miles away. Men who looked nothing like what the world had taught her to expect kindness to look like. Men who were looking back at her now, these big, weathered, unsmiling men, with something soft in their eyes that they weren't trying to hide. One of them, a man near the front with a thick gray ponytail, raised his hand. Then the man next to him. Then the next. One by one, moving down the length of the street like a wave, every single one of them raised their hand. Not a cheer, not a shout, just a gesture. Simple, direct. We see you. Emma looked at it all. She stood in the middle of it, and she looked at every single person who had come me, her chest rising and falling with something too large for her 7-year-old body to contain. Her cast with its 47 stars caught the morning light. Her chin wobbled once, just once. Then she squared her small shoulders, and she raised her good arm, and she waved back. The sound that came up from the street, then not engines, not shouting, just the collective exhale of 190 men who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just for one unexpected Friday morning been allowed to set it down. That sound was not something Emma Carter would ever fully find words for. But she wouldn't need words for it. She would carry it differently, in her bones, in the place where the loneliness used to live. Behind her in the doorway, Tyler Booth stood with his clays. He had nothing to say. For the first time that Emma could remember, he had absolutely nothing to say. The wave didn't stop when Emma went back inside. That was the thing no one had anticipated. Not Harrington, not the officers at the perimeter, not the district administrator who had driven over personally and was now standing on the sidewalk with his arms crossed in the expression of a man whose entire prepared response to the situation had become immediately irrelevant. The men stayed. Not all of them, not forever, but they didn't simply fire up their engines and disappear the moment was over. They stayed the way people stay after something important has happened, because leaving too quickly feels like saying it didn't matter, and every single person on that street knew that it did. A few of the parents who had arrived for the morning drop-off and found the street transformed into something unrecognizable were still standing at the edge of the perimeter. Some of them had gotten back in their cars. Some of them had not. A woman named Carol, whose son was in the 3rd grade and who had lived in Millbrook for 15 years and considered herself a good judge of situations, was standing near the hood of her minivan with her phone in her hand, and she had not taken a single video, which surprised her later when she thought about it. It hadn't felt right to record it. It had felt like the kind of thing that deserved to be witnessed with your whole attention, not through a screen. She watched the big man with the salt and pepper beard come back out of the school, watched him walk to the curb, watched him stand there for a moment with his hands in his jacket pockets and his head slightly bowed, looking at the ground. Then he looked up, and for just a second before he put the face back on the hard-weathered, public face that said, "Don't approach, don't ask, don't expect anything from me," she saw something else, something that looked, if she was being honest with herself, like a man who had just been reminded of something he had spent years trying to forget, that he was capable of being moved. She would think about that expression for weeks. Inside, Emma was back in her classroom, sitting in her seat, and the room around her had changed in the way that rooms change after something seismic. Everything looked the same, and nothing felt the same at all. The worksheet was still on her desk. The pencil was still where she'd set it. The clock on the wall was still moving in its usual indifferent way. But Madison, who sat beside her, was looking at her differently. Not with the vague, uninterested awareness of a classmate you've sat next to for 2 months. With something closer to the look you give a person you realize you may have significantly underestimated. "Were those men really there for you?" Madison said. "Yes," Emma said. Madison was quiet for a moment. Emma thought about how to explain it. "I asked. You just asked. I just asked." Madison turned this over. "That's it. That's it," Emma said. And then, because she was Emma, and because she thought about things honestly, "I think people want to help more than we let them. We just don't ask." Madison stared at her. "You're kind of different, you know that." Emma looked at her. "I know. I mean it like a good thing," Madison said quickly. Emma considered this. "I know," she said again, and this time it landed differently. Softer, like a door opening instead of closing. Mrs. Patterson, who had been standing at the front of the room pretending to organize papers, and very obviously listening to every word, pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she cleared her throat and told everyone to take out their math books, and the class moved forward, the way classes do, because children are extraordinarily resilient about returning to the ordinary when the extraordinary has passed. But the ordinary had shifted, even if no one had a word for how. Tyler Booth was 3 rows back and 1 seat to the left of Emma's line of sight. She did not look at him. She opened her math book and found the right page and started working. But she was aware of him the way you're aware of something that has changed in a room without anyone explicitly announcing the change. He was quiet. He had been quiet since the doors. And Tyler Booth was not a quiet person by nature, which meant the quiet was its own kind of statement. She didn't feel satisfied about that exactly. She wasn't sure what she felt. She would figure it out later. Right now she had 17 division problems and a particular kind of focus that was easier to sustain than it used to be because something inside her had settled into a new position, like furniture rearranged in a room that suddenly had more light. Outside, Jack was having a conversation he hadn't planned on having. The officer who had escorted him inside earlier, a younger guy mid-30s with the careful manner of someone who takes his job seriously without taking himself too seriously, had found him at the curb and stood beside him for a moment before speaking. "You're the chapter leader," he said, not a question. "I am," Jack said. "Can I ask you something off the record?" Jack looked at him sideways. "You can ask." "Why?" Well, the officer said. "Not in a suspicious way. I've been on the job for 12 years. I've never seen anything like this. I want to understand." Jack was quiet for a moment. He looked down the street at his men. At Richie, who was talking to another officer with the careful politeness of someone who has had extensive experience navigating these conversations. At Tommy, who was sitting on his bike and looking at the school entrance with an expression Jack recognized from the men he'd served, with the expression of someone holding something carefully so it doesn't spill. "She wasn't afraid of us," Jack said finally. The officer waited. "You know what people usually do when they see us coming," Jack said. "They make decisions, fast ones, about who we are, what we want, whether they're safe. They lock their car doors, they look at their phones, they find somewhere else to be." He paused. "That kid walked up to me in the middle of a red light and looked at me like I was just a person. Like the question of who I was still open." He stopped. "I haven't felt that way in a long time," he said, and said it simply without self-pity, just as a fact he had decided to be honest about. The officer was quiet for a moment. Then, "For what it's worth," he said carefully, "you did a good thing today." Jack glanced at him. "Don't push it," he said, but the corner of his mouth moved. The officer almost smiled. "Yes, sir." He walked away. Jack stood at the curb and breathed the October air and thought about what it meant to be seen. What it actually meant at the root of it, past all the noise. Not seen the way cameras see you or headlines see you, or even the way old friends see you after so many years. The image is fixed and resistant to new information. Seen the way that child had seen him. Fresh, without the weight of everything that came before. He thought about his son, Marcus. 24 years old, living in Denver, working at a tech company, answering his calls about half the time, and giving clipped, polite responses that communicated clearly that the distance between them was not just geographic. Jack had not pushed. He was not a man who pushed at doors that were mostly closed. He had told himself this was respect for his son's boundaries. He had known privately for some time that it was also fear. Fear that if he pushed and the door didn't open, there would be no way to pretend anymore that it might. He pulled out his phone. He looked at Marcus's name for a long time. He put the phone away. Not today, but the thought had a different weight to it now. A different quality. Like a door that was mostly closed but had somewhere in the last hour developed a small crack of light at the bottom. Richie materialized at his elbow with the unannounced arrival that was one of his defining characteristics. "We should probably start moving out," he said. "Don't want to create a traffic situation all afternoon." "Yeah," Jack said. "Give it a few more minutes." Richie stood beside him. "Media's going to be here soon." "I know." "You want to say anything?" "No." Richie nodded. This was the expected answer. "She waved at us," he said then after a beat, almost to himself. "Yeah," Jack said, "like we were normal." "We are normal," Jack said. Richie was quiet. Then Jack, "We live in a way that most people think is not normal." "Normal is just the average of what people have seen," Jack said. "She hadn't seen enough yet to have an average, so she just saw us." Richie absorbed this. "That's almost poetic," he said. Don't tell anyone, Jack said. For a moment on the sidewalk outside a second-grade school on a Friday morning in October, two middle-aged men in leather vests stood shoulder to shoulder and didn't say anything, and didn't need to. Then Richie made a sound that was almost a laugh. You know the internet is going to explode over this. Jack had not thought about that. He thought about it now. The number of phones that had been pointed at the street this morning. The parents at the perimeter. The officer who had been quietly talking into a radio since about 15 minutes in. The fact that something this visible could not stay private. Let it, he said. Could get complicated, Richie said. Everything worth doing gets complicated, Jack said. He reached back and pulled his helmet from the seat. Let's go. The engine started up again, not all at once, rolling in from one end of the street to the other, a sound that was by any objective measurement extremely loud and entirely impossible to ignore. Inside the school, heads turned to windows. Children pressed their faces against glass. A few of the teachers who had been carefully steering their classes away from the situation all morning gave up the pretense and stood at the windows too, watching the long procession begin its unhurried departure from Birchwood Street. Emma heard it from her classroom. She didn't go to the window. She just sat at her desk, hands folded on top of her closed math book. And she listened to the sound of it, that low, rolling, receding thunder of 190 engines carrying 190 people back to their lives. She listened until she couldn't hear it anymore, until the last of it had dissolved into the ordinary sounds of a Friday morning. Then she unfolded her hands, opened her math book, and found her place again. Madison leaned over. Are you okay? Emma looked at her. Yeah, she said, and meant it in a way she hadn't meant it in a while. The rest of the school day moved the way school days move when something large has happened inside a small space with a heightened attention that looked like normalcy on the surface but wasn't. Teachers were gentler than usual. The cafeteria at lunch had a different quality to its noise, like a conversation being conducted at a slightly lower register. Kids who had never looked directly at Emma looked at her now not with hostility, not even with the complex social math of inclusion or exclusion, but with simple awareness. She existed to them in a new way. She was real in a way she hadn't been yesterday. She ate her lunch, she looked out the window. No pigeon this time, just the sky, which was doing something interesting with the light breaking it into long slanted columns that hit the ground at angles that reminded her of something, though she couldn't say what. Tyler sat down across from her. She looked up. He had his tray and his usual expression, except that something in it was different today. Not chastened exactly, not apologetic, because Tyler Booth was not the kind of 88-year-old who arrived at apologies easily. But the confidence had a dent in it, the casual authority of a kid who has always known how the social geometry works was noticeably less casual. He sat down. He didn't say anything for a moment. He opened his milk carton. Emma waited. Those were real Hell's Angels, he said finally. Not a question. Yes, Emma said. Like real ones. Yes, Tyler. He was quiet, drank his milk, set the carton down. I didn't mean, he started. Emma looked at him. He stopped. Something in her expression, the steady, undemanding honesty of it, made whatever he'd been planning to say rearrange itself before it got all the way out. I shouldn't have said that, he said instead. That thing I said, about nobody wanting to be your friend. Emma looked at him for a long moment. 7 years old, and she already understood instinctively that the space after an apology is where you find out whether the apology was real, whether the person is waiting for absolution or offering something genuine. She studied his face. Why did you say it? She asked. He looked down at his tray. His shoulders moved in a small, uncomfortable shrug. I don't know. I was just saying things. You have to be more careful, Emma said. Not harshly, as a simple statement of fact. Words stay in people, even when you think they don't. Tyler didn't answer, but his jaw tightened in the way it does when something lands somewhere it wasn't expected to. Emma picked up her sandwich. You can sit here if you want, she said. He blinked. Yeah, she said. I was just going to look at those clouds. He followed her gaze to the window, looked at the sky with the half-hearted skepticism of a boy who has not yet developed an interest in clouds, but was in this particular moment willing to be persuaded. That one looks like a dome, he said. Emma tilted her head. I was thinking a bear, but yeah, maybe a dog. They sat there, they ate their lunches. They looked at clouds. No conversation, not exactly, but a shared space that was comfortable in the clumsy, unpolished way that the beginnings of things are always clumsy and unpolished. It was not a friendship yet, but it was the shape of one. Sarah was in the school parking lot when the final bell rang. She had not gone home after the morning. She had sat in her car, then in the school's front office at Janet Morales' insistence that she have a cup of coffee and somewhere warm to be, and then in her car again, and she had not accomplished a single thing on her to-do list and had not cared at all. Emma came out through the front doors in the usual stream of kids, spotted her mother's car, and walked over. Got in, buckled up, set her backpack on the floor. Sarah looked at her. How was the rest of the day? Emma thought about it. Better, she said. Better than what? Better than most days, Emma said. Better than I thought it would be when it started. Sarah nodded. She put the car in reverse. They pulled out of the lot and onto the road and rode in the good silence for a minute. Then Sarah said, I saw them, Emma. Emma looked at her. Of them, Sarah said. Her voice had something fragile in it, held carefully. I was there. I saw all of them line up for you. She paused, and I stood there like an idiot crying in front of a police officer. Emma looked at her mother's profile. Were you embarrassed? Completely, Sarah said. I didn't care at all. Emma almost smiled. He kept his word, she said. The man from the red light. He said okay, and then he kept his word. Sarah was quiet, then she said, when you walked out those doors and you saw them, what did you think? Emma was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window at the town moving past the ordinary Friday afternoon of it, the gas stations and the leaf-covered lawns, and the sky turning the color of something settling toward evening. I thought, she said slowly, that Tyler was wrong. Sarah's breath caught, and I thought, Emma hesitated, working it out in real time the way she always did, assembling the pieces carefully before offering them. I thought that maybe the problem isn't that people don't care. Maybe the problem is that everybody's waiting for someone else to ask first. She paused, and nobody asks. Sarah did not say anything. She pulled up to a red light, a different one on a different street, not the one on Main, and sat there with her hands on the wheel and her eyes forward and her jaw working against something. The light turned green. She drove. And after a moment, almost too quiet to hear, when did you get so wise? Emma shrugged. I just think about things a lot, she said. I have time. I eat lunch alone. The word alone landed between them with a weight they both felt. Not today, Sarah said. Emma turned to look at her. You didn't eat alone today, Sarah said. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, no, not today. What neither of them knew yet, what was building quietly in the outside world while they drove home through the late afternoon, was that someone had filmed it. Not one someone, many someones. And the footage was already moving through the internet with the speed that footage moves when it catches something that people are desperate to believe is real. 190 bikers on a suburban street, a small girl coming through a school door, the long, unbroken wave of raised hands, the cast full of stars. By 6 o'clock that evening, a local news station had picked it up. By 8, it was on national news. By midnight, Emma Carter's name was being said by people in states she had never heard of, in cities she couldn't locate on a map, in languages she didn't speak. By morning, the world she woke up to would be a different one. But that night, she sat at the kitchen table while her mother made dinner, and she took out her markers, and she looked at the cast on her left arm, and she found a small, empty space between two existing stars, and she drew one more, a little larger than the others, 8 points instead of 5. Her mother looked over from the stove. What's that one for? Emma looked at it. For the people who answered, she said. The notification sound on Sarah's phone started at 6:14 in the morning. Not one notification, not a handful. A continuous overlapping cascade of buzzes and chimes that started quietly enough to be mistaken for a malfunction and escalated within 4 minutes into something that made her sit straight up in bed and stare at the screen with the particular confusion of a person whose brain hasn't finished loading yet. She had 47 missed calls. She had over 300 text messages. She had 11 voicemails, 2 of which were from numbers she didn't recognize with area codes she'd never seen, and one of which, the one that made her hand go completely still, was from a producer at a national morning television program. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and read the name of the program twice slowly, the way you read something when you're not sure your eyes are reporting correctly. Then she got up, walked down the hall, and stood in the doorway of Emma's room. Emma was asleep on her back with one arm, the cast, the star one, resting across her stomach and her hair fanned out against the pillow. She looked the way children look when they sleep, which is to say, younger than they look when they're awake, returned temporarily to something softer. Her chest rose and fell with the slow, even rhythm of a person who had done something large and exhausting and was now finally completely at rest. Sarah stood there for a long time while waiting time. Then she went downstairs, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with her phone, and the first of what would turn out to be a very long day of decisions she had not been remotely prepared to make. The footage had moved faster than anyone could have anticipated. Sarah had known last night that something was spreading. She'd seen a local news segment while making dinner, had watched the shaky cell phone footage of the street, and heard the anchor say Emma's name in the careful, interested tone that news people use when a story has cleared some internal threshold of significance. She had turned the TV off before Emma came in from the kitchen and had told herself it was a local story, a nice story, the kind that gets shared around the region for a day or two and then settles. She had been wrong about the settling part. By the time she'd finished her first cup of coffee, she had pulled up 3 separate national news sites, each carrying the story, with the footage each with a comment section that had detonated into the thousands overnight. The headlines were different versions of the same thing, and Sarah read them all with the stunned, slightly nauseated feeling of a person watching a wave they cannot outrun. She was reading the 4th article when her phone rang. A number she didn't know. She let it go to voicemail. It rang again 30 seconds later. She let that go too. Then a text from her sister in Phoenix. Sarah, turn on channel 7. Now. She turned on the television. Emma's name, Emma's school. The footage cleaner this time from a better angle, someone with steadier hands, who'd been standing closer to the front of the perimeter. The cast full of stars was visible. The wave of raised hands was visible. And Emma small and precise, and completely herself raising her good arm and waving back. The anchor was saying something. Sarah's brain couldn't quite process the words because it was occupied entirely with the image, with the fact of it, with the profound and disorienting experience of seeing your child, your private, specific, irreplaceable child exist publicly in a way you never chose and cannot undo. Emma's voice came from the stairs. Mom, why are you up so early? Sarah grabbed the remote and turned the TV off. Couldn't sleep, she said. Come have breakfast. She would tell her. She would absolutely tell her. But she needed 20 minutes to figure out how, and Emma needed to eat something first, and there were certain mornings that deserved to start in the ordinary way before the extraordinary arrived. Emma came into the kitchen in her pajamas, the cast bumping gently against the door frame as she turned sideways out of habit. She looked at her mother with the mild, searching attention she always gave to a room she'd just entered, reading it the way some people read weather. Something happened, Emma said. Sarah looked at her. Why do you say that? You have your worried face, but you're trying not to have your worried face, Emma said. That means something happened that you're deciding how to tell me. Sarah set her coffee mug down. You are, she said carefully, entirely too perceptive for 6:30 in the morning. Did I do something wrong? Emma asked. No, Sarah said, immediately and completely. No, baby, you did not do anything wrong. Emma sat down, waited. Sarah pulled out her phone and turned it so Emma could see the screen. She had pulled up one of the articles, one of the gentler ones with no comments section visible, just the headline and the photograph. The photograph was from the footage. Emma seen from behind, arm raised, facing the street, full of men who had raised their hands back. Emma looked at it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that's me. Yes. That's from yesterday. Yes. Emma looked at it for another moment. A lot of people saw this. A lot of people, Sarah confirmed. It's Emma. It's a big story. It's on national news. People all over the country have seen it. Emma looked at the photograph. She reached out and touched the edge of the phone screen with one finger lightly, as though testing whether it was real. Are you okay? Sarah asked. Emma thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about anything. I don't know yet, she said. I think so. I didn't know other people would see it. I thought it was just for me. Sarah reached across the table and covered Emma's hand with hers. It was for you, she said. It started for you, but sometimes things that are for one person, sometimes they reach other people who needed the same thing. Emma looked at their hands, then up at her mother. What other people? Sarah thought about the comment sections she'd been reading since 5 in the morning, through which she had scrolled with increasing disbelief. Tens of thousands of comments, people saying things she hadn't expected, not just the warm, feel-good responses, but the specific ones. The ones that said, I was the kid nobody saw either. The ones that said, I'm a biker and I've been carrying this my whole life. The ones that said, I haven't talked to my father in 11 years and I just picked up the phone. The ones from teachers, from parents, from grown adults who were apparently sitting in front of their screens at midnight, admitting to an audience of strangers that they had always wanted someone to ask. A lot of different people, Sarah said quietly, from a lot of different places. Emma absorbed this, looked at the photograph again. Is the man okay? She said. The one from the red light, Sarah blinked. Of everything she had anticipated, Emma asking this was not on the list. Why do you ask? Because all these people are looking at him now, Emma said. And I thought he didn't like being looked at too much. I could tell. She paused. I don't want him to feel like it's too much. Sarah stared at her daughter and felt something move through her that was too layered to name. Pride was in there somewhere, and awe, and a helpless, ferocious love that felt in that moment almost too large to contain inside a regular human body. I'll see if I can find out, Sarah said. Jack found out about the coverage the same way he found out about most things Richie told him. Richie had called at 6:47, which was early even by their standards, and had said without preamble, you need to look at your phone. I'm looking at it, Jack said. He had 42 missed calls, most of them from numbers he didn't recognize. 2 from local news stations he identified by area code. 1 from a number in New York with a 212 prefix that he looked at for a long time before deciding to look at later. They're calling it the Biker Brotherhood moment, Richie said. That's what one of the headlines says. That's not what it was, Jack said. I know that. It was just, we just showed up. I know, Jack. We didn't do it for a headline. I know, Richie said, and then after a pause, but the headline is there whether we want it or not, so we have to decide what we do with it. Jack was quiet. He was standing in his kitchen in the same spot he'd stood the night before, looking at the same wall. Outside, it was barely light. The neighborhood was doing its normal morning things, a dog barking somewhere, a car starting up, the regular, percussive sounds of a regular Saturday getting underway. None of it felt entirely regular. Media wants statements, Richie said, at least 4 outlets, and the national morning show is trying to reach Jack. They want to put the kid on television. Jack went still. That's not our call. No, it's the mother's, but they're going to come at her hard. You know what this story is for them? It's the story they need right now. Bikers with hearts of gold. Lonely little girl. America loves this. America is going to use it, Jack said. Not bitterly, just as a fact. Probably, Richie agreed. She's 7. I know. I don't want her turned into a product, Jack said. The word came out harder than he intended, but not harder than he meant it. Then maybe you should talk to the mother, Richie said. Jack looked at the 212 number in his missed calls. How do you figure she got a number for the mother? They're reporters, Jack. That's what they do. He set the phone down on the counter, looked at it, thought about a woman named Sarah Carter, who had sat frozen in a car while her daughter walked up to him at a red light, and who had come to the school that morning with red eyes and a jaw set like a woman lifting something very heavy with no intention of putting it down, and who had looked at him and said thank you in the voice of a person who had been trying to fix something alone for a long time. He picked the phone back up, called Richie back. Get me her number, he said, the mother. Get me the mother's number. I want to talk to her before the media does. A pause, then Richie said with the tone of someone making a note, on it. Blam! Sarah's phone buzzed with an unknown number at 8:15. She had already fielded 2 calls from news outlets, one of which she'd accidentally answered, and then ended so abruptly that the reporter probably felt a small wind. She was prepared to decline this one too, but something made her answer. Hello. A beat, then a voice she recognized immediately, even though she'd only heard it once, low, rough, a certain measured weight to each word, like a man who had learned to be precise because imprecision had cost him things. Mrs. Carter, this is Jack Callahan, the man from the PO. I know who you are, she said, and then more gently, I know who you are. A brief silence. I wanted to call before the media got too loud, he said. They're going to come for you, hard. This story is everywhere. I know, Sarah said. I've been reading. They're going to want Emma on camera. I know that too. It's your decision entirely, he said. I'm not telling you what to do. I just wanted to say, he stopped, recalibrated. She's a kid. She's a real kid, and this is her real life. Whatever you decide, just decide it for her, not for anybody else. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, she asked about you this morning. She heard something shift in the quality of the silence on the other end. About me. She was worried you'd be uncomfortable with all the attention. She said she could tell you didn't like being looked at too much. A long pause. She's 7, Jack said. His voice had something different in it now. 7 years, 3 months, and 12 days, Sarah said. But she's been paying attention for longer than that. Another silence. And then Jack Callahan, chapter leader, 53 years old, a man who had not cried in front of another person since he was 19, cleared his throat once very carefully. Tell her I'm all right, he said. Tell her, he stopped again. Tell her the guy from the red light says she doesn't have to worry about him. Sarah pressed her free hand against her sternum. I'll tell her. And Mrs. Carter. Sarah, she said, Sarah. He said it simply, accepting it. Whatever you decide about the media, if it ever gets to be too much, you can say no. You can always say no. People forget that. They make you feel like you owe them the story. You don't. Thank you, she said. She's your daughter, he said. She's not a headline. Protect her. Sarah hung up and sat very still for a moment. Then Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway with her cast on her hip and her expression carefully neutral, in the way it got when she was trying to give someone space to have feelings without making it awkward. Was that him? Emma asked. Sarah looked at her. How did you know? Your voice changed, Emma said. Sarah smiled despite everything. Yes, it was him. She held out her arms and Emma crossed the kitchen and leaned into them, which she did not always permit because she was 7 and fiercely independent, but which she permitted now, and Sarah held on with both arms. He says he's all right. He says you don't have to worry about him, Emma nodded against her shoulder. I figured, she said. He seems like the kind of person who handles things. He does, Sarah agreed. They stayed like that for a moment. Outside, the Saturday was getting louder with itself. The phone on the table buzzed again. Neither of them looked at it. Mom, Emma said. Yeah. I don't want to go on television. Sarah exhaled slowly. Okay. I didn't do it for television. I did it because I wanted to prove Tyler wrong. She paused. I think it's already proved. I don't need a camera. Sarah pressed her lips to the top of Emma's head. I think that's exactly the right call, she said. Emma pulled back, looked at her mother. But can I write him a letter? Who? The man from the red light, Jack. She said the name carefully like she was trying it out. I want to say thank you properly. Not in a phone call, in a letter, because letters are more real. Sarah looked at her daughter. Where did you get that from? Emma thought about it. I read it somewhere. That letters are more real because they take longer. You have to mean it more to write it down. Sarah nodded slowly. I'll see if I can get an address, she said. Emma nodded, satisfied, complete. The way she always looked when a decision had been made and the shape of the next thing was clear. She went back upstairs to get dressed. Sarah sat at the table and looked at the buzzing phone and made a decision of her own clearly and without anguish, which was that her daughter would not be anyone's morning segment and would not be packaged and presented to the country as a symbol of something, because Emma Carter was not a symbol. She was a person, a specific, particular, irreducible person who drew stars on things and thought about clouds and had walked up to a man at a red light with the quiet, unshakable certainty that asking was always better than staying silent. She picked up the phone, declined the call, and started composing a single carefully worded statement that said in essence, we are grateful, we are private, and we are done. She sent it to every number that had called that morning. Then she put the phone face down on the table and went to make pancakes. 300 miles away in a kitchen in Denver, a 24-year-old named Marcus Callahan was sitting in front of his laptop watching the footage for the third time. He was watching the part at the end, the part where the hands went up. He kept replaying it, the wave of it moving down the street from one man to the next, unhurried and unanimous, and the small girl at the center of it raising her arm back. He knew without having been told exactly who had organized it. He had grown up watching his father be the person other people called when something needed to be done. He had grown up in the specific gravity of a man who did not speak much, but moved decisively, who filled rooms with something that was not exactly comfort, but was adjacent to it, who had held his family together through sheer force of presence, even when the family had not made it easy for him to do that. He had spent the last 4 years maintaining a distance he had convinced himself was healthy. He was watching the footage for the fourth time when his phone buzzed. A text from a number he knew, his father's number. He hadn't initiated contact in 3 months. The text said only, "Hope you're doing well, son." That was it. 5 words. No context, no appeal, no emotional leverage. Just 5 words that somehow contained every conversation they hadn't had in 4 years compressed into the space of a single line. Marcus stared at the screen. On the laptop in front of him, the footage looped back to the beginning. A suburban street, a school, the sound of engines arriving. He picked up his phone. He typed, "I saw what you did." He sent it before he could think too hard about it. 3 seconds later, 3 dots appeared. Then his father's reply, "Wasn't me, was a kid with a broken arm." Marcus looked at that for a moment. Then he typed, "Can I call you?" The dots appeared immediately. Then yeah. Marcus set the laptop aside, closed the footage, sat up straight in the way a person sits up when they're about to do something that matters. He pressed call. It rang once. His father's voice, low, rough, not performing anything, just being what it was. "Hey." And Marcus Callahan, 24 years old, who had spent 4 years constructing a careful architecture of distance and self-protection around a wound he had never fully looked at, directly said, "Hey, Dad." 2 words. And in the silence that followed, a door that had been mostly closed for 4 years opened slowly and unevenly, and with the particular awkwardness of something that has been still for too long. But it opened. In Millbrook, Colorado, a 7-year-old girl was drawing stars on a letter she was writing to a man she had met once at a red light. She drew one at the top corner of the page and one at the bottom, and then she looked at the letter she had written, 5 sentences carefully constructed, each word chosen because it was exactly the word she meant. And she felt satisfied with it. In the deep, settled way, she felt satisfied with things that were true. She folded it, wrote the name on the front, and set it on the kitchen counter for her mother to mail. Outside, the Saturday was continuing in its ordinary way, entirely unaware that it was the last ordinary Saturday for a while. The phone on the counter was face down and silent. The sky through the window was doing something interesting with the afternoon light. Emma looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up her marker, found a new empty space on the cast, and drew one more star. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Jack knew it was coming because Sarah had texted him 3 days earlier, a brief practical message that said simply, "Emma wrote you something. Is it okay to send it?" He had replied with his P.O. box address and then spent the next 72 hours in a state he would not have been able to describe to anyone, and therefore did not try to describe to anyone, including Richie, who noticed the distraction but had the wisdom to say nothing about it. It was a standard white envelope, slightly uneven at the seal, the way envelopes get when a child licks them, with his name written on the front, in the careful, deliberate handwriting of a 7-year-old who takes letters seriously. There was a star drawn in the top left corner, where a return address would normally go. He stood at the end of his driveway, holding it for a moment before going inside. He sat at the kitchen table. He opened it carefully, the way you open something you know matters. The letter was 5 sentences. She had drawn a star at the top and a star at the bottom, and written in the middle in blue marker, in that same careful hand, "Dear Jack, thank you for keeping your word. I told my mom that mean people don't laugh the way you laughed, and she said I was right. I hope you are not too uncomfortable with all the people looking. You were the first person who answered. Your friend Emma. Your friend." He read it twice. Then he set it flat on the table and pressed his palm against it, the way you press your hand against something you want to make sure is real. He sat there for a long time. He had been called many things in 53 years. Brother, leader, a problem, a headline, a cautionary tale. He had been called dangerous by people who had never met him, and loyal by people who had known him for decades, and difficult by both of his ex-wives, and he had accepted all of these designations with varying degrees of agreement and varying degrees of indifference. He had never been called someone's first. He picked up his phone, opened the message thread with Marcus, which had been more active in the past 4 days than in the previous 4 years combined. Nothing dramatic. They were both men who had inherited a particular economy with words, a tendency to communicate in short, direct bursts, and let the silences carry what the words couldn't hold. But it was active. It was real. It had the fragile, tentative quality of something being rebuilt, one careful piece at a time, which was the only honest way to rebuild anything. He typed, "Got her letter." Marcus replied within a minute. "What did it say?" "See?" Jack looked at the 5 sentences. "She called me her friend." A pause, then, "Are you okay?" Jack almost smiled at that. His son asking him if he was okay. 4 years of distance and a 7-year-old girl with a cast full of stars had somehow rearranged the geography between them, enough that this question, simple, direct, genuinely meant could travel from Denver to Millbrook without getting lost. "Yeah," he typed. "I'm good." Then after a moment, "And you should come up sometime when you're ready. No pressure." He set the phone down, looked at the letter, looked at the star in the top left corner. He got up, opened the kitchen drawer where he kept the things that mattered: insurance documents, the deed to the house, a photograph of Marcus at age 6 sitting on the first bike Jack had ever owned, looking at the camera with an expression of absolute joy, and he placed the letter inside carefully and closed the drawer. 3 weeks after this morning on Birchwood Street, Emma's cast came off. The appointment was at 9 in the morning, a Tuesday, and Emma sat in the orthopedist's office with her arm on the table and watched the small circular saw move toward the cast, with an expression of complete composure that the nurse later described to her colleague as either very brave or very unusual, and possibly both. Sarah sat in the chair beside the table and held her own hands in her lap and tried to look calm. The saw cut through. The cast opened. The doctor peeled it back. Emma looked at her arm, pale, slightly strange, feeling lighter than she remembered arms feeling. She flexed her fingers slowly, rotated her wrist. Everything worked. Everything was healed, the bone knit back together and solid, the body having done in 7 weeks what it always knew how to do. She looked at the cast lying open on the table, at the stars. All of them, the original 7 and the 40 that followed, and the one she'd drawn for the people who answered, the 8-pointed ones, slightly larger than the others, and every single one she'd added in the week since. She looked at them the way you look at something that has been with you through a particular chapter of your life and is now closing with it. The nurse started to move the cast toward a waste bin. "Wait," Emma said. The nurse stopped. "Can I keep it?" The doctor smiled. "Of course you can." Emma picked it up with her newly freed left hand, feeling the strange lightness of it, and held it against her chest. Sarah watched her and did not say anything, because some moments don't need words added to them. In the car on the way home, Emma held the cast in her lap with both hands. She looked out the window. The town moved past. Ordinary Tuesday. Ordinary Colorado. Ordinary life, continuing in its ordinary way around the fact of everything that had happened inside it. "It's weird," Emma said. "My arm feels like it forgot how to be an arm." "It'll remember," Sarah said. "Give it a few days." Emma looked down at the catch, ran her thumb across a cluster of stars near the wrist. "I'm glad I broke it," she said. Sarah glanced at her. "Why?" Emma thought about it. "Because if I hadn't broken it, I wouldn't have had the cast. And if I didn't have the cast, I wouldn't have drawn stars. And if I didn't draw stars, I wouldn't have been thinking about stars when I saw the motorcycles. And if I wasn't thinking about stars," she paused, working through the logic, "I might have just looked away, like everybody else." Sarah drove. The light ahead turned yellow and she slowed for it. "You really think it works that way?" she said quietly. "That things connect like that?" Emma considered this seriously. "I think things connect more than we notice," she said. "We just don't usually follow the line all the way back to see where it started." The light turned green. They moved forward. "Mom," Emma said. "Yeah." "Do you think he's okay? For real? Not just what he said on the phone?" Sarah thought about the voice she'd heard on that call, the careful way he'd said her name, The thing she'd heard underneath the practical words, something settling, something relieved, like a man who had put down something heavy and was relearning how to stand without the weight. I think, she said carefully, that you did something for him that he didn't know he needed. Emma turned this over. What did I do? You let him be the answer to something, Sarah said. People like him, people who've spent a long time being the problem, the threat, the thing other people are afraid of, they don't get to be the answer very often. She paused. You gave him that. Emma was quiet for a moment. I just asked, she said. I know, Sarah said. That's the whole point. Sure. 6 weeks after the morning on Birchwood Street, Marcus Callahan drove up from Denver on a Saturday. He had texted 2 days before, free this weekend if the offer still stands. And Jack had replied, come whenever. And that had been the entire negotiation, which was appropriate for two people who communicated primarily in compression and silence. Marcus arrived mid-morning. Jack heard the car in the driveway and stayed in the kitchen because going to the door felt like too much pressure on a thing that needed to be allowed to arrive at its own pace. Marcus came in through the back the way he always had. He was tall, taller than Jack remembered, or maybe Jack had just been thinking of a version of him that was perpetually 6 years old sitting on a motorcycle. He had his mother's eyes and Jack's jaw, and the particular way of entering a room that Jack recognized as his own, taking it in, first finding the edges, orienting before committing. They looked at each other. Hey, Jack said. Hey, Marcus said. They shook hands and then did the thing that was almost a hug but started as a handshake and ended with a hand on a shoulder and a brief, firm grip that communicated more than either of them would have been able to say in full sentences. Marcus sat down at the kitchen table. Jack poured coffee, set a mug in front of him. They sat in silence for a moment, the comfortable kind and the uncomfortable kind mixed together in the particular way of people who have history. I watched the footage again the night before I texted you, Marcus said. Jack wrapped both hands around his mug. I kept watching the part with the hands, Marcus said, all of them going up. And I thought, he stopped. I thought that's what you always did for the people around you. Show up without making a speech about it. He looked at the table. I forgot that for a while. I was angry for a long time, and I made it mean more than it did. Jack was very still. I'm not saying everything was perfect, Marcus said. I'm not saying I wasn't right to be angry about some things. You were right to be angry about some things, Jack said. Marcus looked up. I wasn't around enough, Jack said. Said it flat and straight without ornamentation because it was true and had been true, and the only thing to do with a true thing was to say it. When your mother and I fell apart, you were 16 and I handled it badly, and I kept handling it badly for a couple of years because I didn't know how to be in a family that had changed shape. That's on me. It's always been on me. Marcus was quiet. His jaw worked. I know I can't fix what that was like for you, Jack said. I'm not trying to. I'm saying I know. And I'm sorry. The words sat between them on the kitchen table, simple and direct and long overdue. Marcus looked at his coffee mug. His hand around it was the same shape as his father's hand. He had always hated noticing that. Right now it felt different, not like something to resist, just like a fact, neutral and plain, something you could simply accept. Okay, Marcus said, not forgiveness, not yet, not completely, but the beginning of the shape of it. The door further opened now enough that light was getting through from both sides. They sat there, they drank their coffee. They talked slowly at first, and then with increasing ease, the way rivers run slowly in some places, and faster in others, depending on the shape of the ground beneath them. They talked about Marcus's job, which was more interesting than Jack had understood from the brief summaries Marcus had provided over the past few years. They talked about the chapter, which was more complicated than it looked from the outside, which Marcus had always known, but was willing to hear about now with new patience. They talked around the 4 missing years without going directly into them, which was fine, which was honest, because some terrain you map from the edges before you walk into the center of it. At one point, Jack got up and opened the kitchen drawer and took out the letter. He set it on the table in front of Marcus without saying anything. Marcus picked it up. Read it. Read it again. He set it down. He looked at his father. She called you her first, he said. Yeah, Jack said. Marcus looked at the letter for a long moment. 7 years old, he said almost to himself. 7 years old, Jack confirmed, and she just walked up to you, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Marcus was quiet. Then I think I've been waiting my whole life for someone to walk up to me like that, he said. And I never, he stopped. His voice had something rough in it that he was working to manage. I never thought about the fact that I could be the one to walk up first. Jack looked at his son. You just did, he said. Marcus met his eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, on a Saturday morning in a kitchen in Colorado, over 2 mugs of coffee and a 7-year-old girl's letter, 2 people who had been on opposite sides of a silence for too long looked at each other clearly, without defenses, without the accumulated weight of everything unsaid, and found that what was on the other side of the silence was not emptiness. It was just each other, still there. The cast sat on Emma's bookshelf, now propped between a book about weather patterns and a small ceramic owl she'd won at a school fair. Her arm had remembered how to be an arm within a week, strong and functional, and hers again. She had gone back to using both hands for everything, and the freedom of it was something she noticed consciously for several days before it became ordinary. School was different, not completely, not in the dramatic movie version way where everything resolves cleanly and the girl who sat alone at the end of the lunch table is suddenly surrounded by a crowd of people who finally understand her worth. It wasn't like that. It was quieter than that and more real. Madison had started walking with her to class in the mornings. Not every morning, but most. She had a tendency to talk more than Emma, which Emma found she didn't mind at all. It was restful, actually, to walk beside someone whose words filled the air without requiring constant response. They had not yet made the cloud chart that Emma had mentioned to Tyler weeks ago, but Madison had said unprompted on a Thursday that looked like it had good cloud potential. We should do the chart today after school, and Emma had said yes with a certainty that surprised her in its simplicity. Tyler was Tyler. He had not transformed. He was still loud, still the gravitational center of his third-grade social universe, still occasionally careless with the things he said. But he sat across from Emma at lunch sometimes, and he had told her once with the gruff offhandedness of a boy who cannot quite manage sincerity in the full light of day, that the cloud thing she did was actually kind of interesting. Imao had accepted this for what it was, which was as close to an olive branch as Tyler Booth was going to produce, and had told him that the cloud over the gym that day looked like a horse and a half. He had looked. More like a dog, he said. You always say dog, Emma said. Because they always look like dogs, he said. It was not a deep friendship, but it was something honest, and honest things have a way of growing into whatever they're meant to become if you leave them enough room. One afternoon in November, 6 weeks after the cast came off, Emma's teacher gave the class an assignment. Write 1 sentence about something you learned this year. Not something from a textbook. Something real. Emma sat with the blank paper for a minute. Around her, pencils scratched and erasers worked, and the room filled with the productive hum of children thinking. She looked at the paper, then she picked up her pencil and she wrote in the careful, deliberate hand that took letters seriously, I learned that people want to help more than we know, but somebody has to ask first, and that somebody can be you. She set her pencil down. Read it once, didn't change a word. When her mother asked that evening how school had been, Emma said it had been good. Her mother asked if anything interesting happened. Emma thought about the sentence. I wrote something I think is true, she said. What was it? Emma told her. Sarah stood at the kitchen counter and listened, and when Emma was done, she turned back to what she was doing and said nothing for a moment. Then, I think that might be the most important thing you have ever written. Emma considered this. It's only 1 sentence. The best ones usually are, Sarah said. Emma went upstairs, stood in her doorway and looked at the cast on the shelf with its crowded galaxy of stars. She had stopped counting them weeks ago. There were too many now overlapping at the edges, filling every available space until the white of the original plaster was barely visible beneath them. She thought about the man at the red light who had laughed when she told him she'd already introduced herself. She thought about the wave of hands moving down the street. She thought about Tyler saying dog when she said bear, and Madison saying we should do the chart today, and her mother's face at the perimeter that morning, hand pressed to her mouth, eyes bright. She thought about the feeling she'd had when she first heard the engines, that feeling of the world doing something you didn't know it could do. She thought, I wonder who else is waiting to be asked. She thought I should ask more people. She turned off her light, got into bed, looked at the ceiling in the dark. And somewhere in Colorado, in a garage full of tools and old memories, and one carefully folded letter in a kitchen drawer, Jack Callahan sat in the good quiet and thought about a door that was more open than it had been. And in Denver, his son sat at his desk and looked at a contact in his phone that he had called once and was planning to call again. And in Millbrook, in a classroom, a sentence written by a 7-year-old was still sitting on a desk waiting to be graded. True as anything that had ever been written in that room. Emma Carter had not changed the world, but she had changed the part of it she could reach, and she had done it the only way it ever gets done, the way it has always gotten done, the way every door that was ever open between two people was opened. She asked. That was all. She simply asked. And the world, which had been waiting longer than anyone knew to be asked, answered her back loud and rumbling, and real and certain in the only language that has ever meant anything. We are here, we see you. You were never as alone as you thought.